This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hello and welcome to the Extra Point Podcast. My name is Anna Blake. I'm the youth pastor here at Southridge Church, and we are looking back at week 13 of our Rise and Fall series. Joining with us today is our lead pastor, Scott Beha, and we're going to start with a little bit of a recap. Scott, tell us what did we get to experience on the week 13?
Yeah, so this past week we were answering the question, if we have already rebelled against God, or if we do rebel against God, is there any hope for us? Because we left the series off 2 weeks ago with talking about this is the tactic of the enemy, this is how he tries to get us to go astray. And then the next logical question is, well, it's nice that you told us that, but it would have been really nice if I'd have known that 10 years ago. And so, since I've already rebelled and I've already caused damage and I've already turned my back on God, is there any hope for me? And so we were answering that question through the story of Absalom, King David's son's rebellion that he leads. And so early on, right after he's reconciled to his dad, we learned 2 weeks ago that Absalom was going out to the city gate and essentially just stealing the hearts of the people by giving them favorable judgments for the things that they were bringing to the king and then talking poorly about the king. He does that for 4 years. And after 4 years, his plan is ready to move forward. And so he tells David that he needs to go to Hebron, which was the place where David's original base of operations was when he came back after Saul's death to become king. So Absalom says, I need to go to Hebron. I promised the Lord I would sacrifice to him there during my time of exile. So David goes, all right, go on and go. And when he gets to Hebron, he sends letters out to all of Israel and says, when the ram's horns blow, say Absalom is king and the rebellion is on. And now he must have been so good at whatever he was doing for those 4 years to steal the hearts of the people that it worked. Like, it legitimately worked. He became the king of Israel in that moment. So much so that David felt the weight of it when David finds out that this has happened. David doesn't go, oh, that's just my son. He's, nobody's really with him. Like, David knew what was going on, and so much so that him and his little entourage takes off. They hit the road because they know that they'll be destroyed and the whole city of Jerusalem will be destroyed if Absalom shows back up with the troops of Israel who have now claimed him as king. And so David goes into exile, and as he walks along the path, he meets some people that are favorable towards him, that some of them he sends back into Jerusalem as like double agents that are going to send messages back and forth and try to get in Absalom's way. Some, like we met the guy named Shimei, who's not a fan of Dave's, and threw rocks at him and his little entourage and cursed him, said, you're getting a taste of your own medicine, because he was a Benjamite, so was Saul, the first king of Israel. He felt that David had stolen the throne away from Saul and his family and his tribe, and so he wasn't a fan, and so he continues on, and then Absalom gets back to Jerusalem finally, and it's time to make his move. Like, if you're going to become the king, you got to get rid of the other king, essentially. And so he has two different advisors. One, Ahithophel, who was a friend of David's, actually gives the better advice and says, take 12,000 people and go right now while David and his men are weary from the journey and sad because, his own flesh and blood have started an insurrection against them. Go now, which was the better plan, but God was frustrating Ahithophel's advice when it comes to Absalom because God clearly didn't want this rebellion to take place. And so the other advisor's plan was to let Israel fully gather its strength behind you and then go, which gave David time to rest, gave more time to plan. It was a clunkier operation whenever you get all of Israel involved instead of just 12,000 men. They can't move fast. And so battle lines are drawn up, and there's a battle waging. And what happens is eventually Absalom, while he's riding a mule, gets his hair that they talked about in 2 Samuel 14 caught in a tree, which it almost sounds like something out of a comedy movie. that he got caught in a tree by the very thing that, for him was probably an area of pride, because they said he would cut his hair once a year and it would weigh 5 pounds when he cut it, and that he was just a big, handsome man. It was the type of man that you would want to be king, because in that time, that's what you wanted, a big, handsome, well, fit, tall, muscular, all this. That's what they wanted. That was their picture of a king, and, Absalom fit the bill for that. And so this very thing that there was probably so much pride around is actually the very thing that gets him tangled up into this tree. He's found by somebody who did not want to kill him, because he knew David had asked even the troops that were going into battle, hey, fight each other, but take it easy on my kid. And so this guy doesn't want to kill him, and so he goes and tells Joab, and Joab goes and plunges 3 daggers into his heart, and then 10 of his armor bearers come and finish the job. And so Absalom dies. With that, the rebellion dies. And so all of Israel essentially goes, Dave, we're sorry. We didn't mean to do that whole rebellion thing. We would like you to be king again, which is a really beautiful picture of what all of us do in our lives, that we turn our backs on God. We decide to go our own way for a little while. We realize that was a disaster, because that thing really isn't everything that it promised that it would be. Absalom never turned out to be the king that he was probably promising all these people that he would be. And so therefore they turn back to David, and David, being a picture of Jesus, goes, yes, I'll give you another chance. Even though you continuously turn your back on me, you continue to cause me problems. It's the second time I've been chased around by a madman trying to fight me over being king and all this stuff. Yes, I'll still take you back. And so David takes Israel back. He comes back as their king. He goes back to Jerusalem. He sits on the throne, and that's where we'll be able to pick up the story in the coming weeks. But we see so many different pictures of God and how he handles us, because I said it towards the beginning of the sermon, all of us are Absalom at some point in our life. We were born as an Absalom. We were born as a rebel, and until we encounter the grace and the mercy of Jesus, we're rebels. And then for some, there will be times in your life where you still turn your back on God and go, you know what, in this moment, I'm just going to do my own thing. And you're going to have to come back and repent because you decided to follow a lesser king for that moment. And so it's just a good thing to be reminded that there is hope for the rebel, whether you have been a rebel your whole life, or maybe you just went through a really bad season or just had a really bad Friday night. No matter how deep your rebellion goes, there is hope for the rebel. And that hope is grounded in the story that this is actually pointing towards. This is the beautiful thing about the Bible. It's telling history of what actually happened. So Israel's recording all of this. All along, though, because God is the author of all history, it's very cheesy, I get that, but I heard someone say it one time, history is his story. I know, it's cheesy.
That was maybe a youth camp theme at some point, probably, huh?
Was it?
I think it might have been.
Oh
I'm just saying that's what it gives.
I heard somebody say that in an adult service, and I was like, that's true, also cheesy. But it is. So God took these very real events like Absalom's rebellion, but all along knew that they would be pointing to a greater truth. And it's that greater truth that is why there's hope for the rebel.
Yeah, I know that's a much needed and appreciated message for many of us, myself included, especially in those times where we do question, like, is there a place to go from here? Because I think I'm at the bottom. And I so appreciate the correlations to a real life application that we hear through this telling of the story. Particularly, you pulled in, and you said this in the teaching. If our listeners, our viewers haven't gone back, go back and see this, because Scott, you just kind of give almost a glance, passing by a window view of something that means a deeper meaning and has more context. And that was this welcoming back of King David, as the townspeople went out and met him at the river, as they went out and met him and helped him bring his goods back, bring his people back, bring these things back into into his kingdom. You use this term, this Greek term, parousia. Is that? So this Greek term meaning to meet the king and welcome him back to his kingdom.
Yeah.
The window glance snapshot that you gave was, this is also mirrored in New Testament writing.
Yes.
When it comes to the resurrected King Jesus returning to his kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's our misunderstanding, I think, for a lot of people, of the word parousia and the historical context of it has led us to have a lot of kind of different views on the second coming of Jesus, that if we would just get this term right, it might actually fix what I have been kind of championing for the last 5 or 6 years in my teaching, that we need to be talking more about the new heavens and the new earth, and not so much about the I'll fly away type theology of like, well, when I die, I'm going to go to be in heaven forever, because that's not actually the picture that the scriptures make. The picture is you'll go to heaven, if you mean heaven as the place where God is, because Paul says to be absent from the body is to be present with Christ. That's fine, but that will be a temporary situation, of which when God recreates the whole created order, heaven and earth remade, once again coming back together the way they were in the beginning, that will be the final resting place of the faithful in Christ. The way that we get that is the picture of the parousia, which some people, when they say parousia, they go, oh, that means the second coming of Jesus. Yes, but it means a very specific vision of the second coming of Jesus. Some other people talk about the parousia as in like a rapture theology. And again, if you don't follow my teaching, I do not believe that the Bible speaks of a rapture anywhere whatsoever. And when you get to like what we would call like key rapture verses, like 1 Thessalonians 4, like let me pull it up for us. 1 Thessalonians 4 is the example I gave yesterday. And it speaks of a parousia in regards to the second coming of Christ. It does not speak of a rapture whatsoever. And this is what Paul writes. And Paul, being very well versed in the historical context of the topic of parousia, he says, we tell you this directly from the Lord. We who are still living when the Lord returns will not meet him ahead of those who have died. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a commanding shout and the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet call of God. First, the believers who have died will rise from their graves. Then, together with him, we who are still alive and remain on the earth will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Then we will be with the Lord forever. So encourage each other with these hopes. What the picture is, and again, I don't fully, you have to put a bunch of different things together that are unrelated to get to a rapture theology. But if you took this passage at face value, what you have is Jesus appearing in the air, and he's on his way down. He's not like the rapture theology is he comes like halfway down, sucks the church out, and boom, poof, they're off and gone. No, let's just be rational people for a second. If God really wanted to rapture the church, he would not need to send his son Jesus halfway down into the sky to do so.
Right.
He could just do it from where he's at. So he doesn't have the reason why in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 Jesus is descending on a cloud is because he's coming to where he has established his kingdom, which he tells us in the Gospels that's what he did the first time he was here, established his kingdom, which this is where his kingdom will reign and rule forever. Will it be like it is right now? No, it will be like we just said, the renewed heavens and earth. And so he says those that are faithful, that are still on the earth when this happens, will be caught up to meet him in the air. It's a parousia. It's the faithful coming out of the town gates to welcome the king to where he was coming. This is what happens in David's story. David is coming back to Jerusalem, so the people come out of Jerusalem, not so the way David can lead them back across the Jordan to somewhere else, but so the way they can usher David back into his kingdom where he can sit on his rightful throne in Jerusalem. That's the proper picture that we should see in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, that we are welcoming Jesus to his renewed creation, into his kingdom, where he will reign and rule forever and ever. Amen.
Wow. Yep. Thank you for sharing that. That's like one of the things that I think can really, as we talk more on that, as we share more in that lens and viewing it through that way, I think it will clear the air on a lot of confusing things and troubling things. I know as someone who works with young people, there's so many different opinions and things out there, fear mongering of these different areas that I think could be so released and relieved when we look at things in the way that they were culturally and contextually written.
Yeah. Well, in all of this talk of rapture and everything, if you all were here with us back in 21 or 22,
21 maybe, yeah.
I did a series on end times and things like this, and all of this talk stems from one specific eschatology, which is the study of the end times, called dispensationalism, that I am not a fan of. I'm okay with the other three major views. Dispensationalism, I do take it kind of. I do have an issue with it because I think that it leads people astray. I think it leads people into fear. And what they're doing with this theology is they're the ones creating the problems, and then they're trying to solve them with their theology. That if they didn't create the problem in the first place, they wouldn't need to create a doctrine to solve the problem. Here's what I mean by that. Dispensational theology holds that God still has two separate groups of people, despite all of the work that Paul did in the New Testament to talk about how Israel now are the faithful of God to the Messiah, Jesus, how there is one people of God. Dispensationalists go, no, God still has ethnic Israel and the church, and so they had to create a rapture in the scriptures to get rid of the church so God could deal with Israel. They solved a problem. Don't get me wrong, they solved a problem, but they solved a problem that they created by having two separate groups of people instead of just the one group of people that we clearly see is the church as the new Israel in the New Testament. So that's the bigger issue for me with this dispensational theology that's talking about the rapture. And we'd go to 1 Thessalonians 4, and they'd go, no, Jesus only comes halfway down, and then he goes back up. And I go, where?
Right.
Where does it say that in the text? It says that the people meet him in the air, right? And with the cultural context of the parousia, it's very obvious that Jesus is coming to renew the heavens and the earth and to reign and to rule on that. What makes the story even more beautiful, and again, we were drawing, we'll get into more of it here in just a second, but drew a lot of comparison between Absalom and David's story and Jesus' story.
Yeah.
One of the things about the parousia that makes it so beautiful, when you see the glimpse of it in David's story, it tells us that Shimei, who was the guy that was throwing rocks and curses at David and his crew, Shimei and 1,000 other Benjamites, which definitely meant that they were a part of the rebellion because they were Saul's people, all came and participated in the parousia. The picture is, this is what's so beautiful, that the people that are welcoming Jesus back to his kingdom, the people that were welcoming David back to his kingdom were the rebels.
Yeah.
They were the people that had been forgiven by the king. So the people that are being caught up to meet the Lord in the air are the rebels that the story of Jesus came to give them hope.
Yeah.
So it's the very ones that had turned their backs on him are the ones welcoming him back to his kingdom, which is what's going to happen when Jesus returns.
No, that's beautiful. Actually gave me some chills to consider what a great love that is. What a just wow. Very thankful for that. So as we go further into that, for this this story that we're reaching in today with week 13, go ahead and touch base on that last bit.
Yeah. So I want to go at this in a way that I hope will help. I told Megan as I was driving home yesterday, I said, I really hope that whenever I do something like that, it gives people confidence that they can go to the Old Testament and get something out of it. So that way it's like, why do I need to read the Old Testament if I'm under the New Covenant? Well, it's like because there was echoes of that story. And the deeper that you understand the Jewish context of the Jesus story, the more robust your understanding of the whole story is. And so there's this echo in the story. And so I told Megan, I said, I really hope people learn how to see Jesus in the Old Testament because it strengthens your faith when you can do that. And so when you see a story like this is one of the more obvious ones. That I don't know that you need a lot of walking you to the door type. I think that you can figure it out on your own for the most part, but most people don't give much time to the study of scriptures. And we covered 15 to 19, which definitely flies, chapters 15 to 19, which flies in the face of this devotional culture that the church has created where we read one verse and then listen to someone else talk for 5 minutes about that verse. You'll never see it if you only read one verse. If you don't systematically study the Bible chapter by chapter the way that we're trying to teach you to through the Rise and Fall series, you'll miss out on this. And so you can see these large stories come together and point directly to Jesus. And so I talked about how it all starts with a kiss, right? When David is reunited with Absalom, it says David kisses him on the cheek. That's the beginning of Absalom's rebellion. For Judas, he shows up in the garden, kisses Jesus on the cheek, and begins that rebellion. Judas's rebellion probably started earlier, but you see the similarities. They both end up with a kiss. David, as he's leaving Jerusalem because of fear of Absalom returning there, it tells us he goes out the eastern side of Jerusalem. It has to be the eastern side. Why? Because that's where the Kidron Valley is. Then the Kidron Valley you go right up the slope to the Mount of Olives. That's the route David takes on the night that Jesus and his disciples gathered around having the Last Supper together. When they were done, it says that they sung a hymn and they headed out to the Mount of Olives, which means Jesus and his disciples left through the eastern side of Jerusalem, walked across the Kidron Valley, and also somberly, just like David, walked up the Mount of Olives. Jesus definitely somberly, because in not too long he's going to be crying and praying so profusely that he's going to bust his capillaries in his eyes. Essentially, he's going to be sweating drops of blood. He's going to be in so much anguish. And so you see the pictures they're lining up together. You see it also in something like Absalom is killed while hanging from a tree, and he's paying the penalty for what he did, which is that's an option that's given to everybody. If you want to pay for your rebellion, then you can pay for your rebellion, separated from God for all time. Instead, the greater Son of David, Jesus, puts himself on the tree so the way you don't have to. And so you see the similarities there. You see when David is having Absalom is rebelling, Shimei is calling out curses, all of this. David never once defends himself or fights back. He says, I will trust God to vindicate me. Jesus stands silent before Pilate, accusation after accusation in these like little kangaroo courts that the Pharisees were holding in the middle of the night to try to convict him. He doesn't stand there and fight back. He lets the Father's will be done. So we see David modeling the same thing that Jesus did in that moment. We see David says to, I think it's to Joab, he really, it's probably just him remarking to himself, to be honest, but it's shortly before Joab comes. He's like, oh, Absalom, my son, if only I could have died instead of you. Like the father side of David wanted to die for his guilty son. Mm-hmm. Jesus, who comes and he does die for us, the guilty rebels. And so over and over and over, you see this picture just echoing more and more and more. Even with the parousia we just talked about, they come out to meet David. One day, God's people are going to come and meet Jesus in the air and usher him back to his kingdom. You get the forgiveness of Shimei, who had did something wrong, and David goes, today is not a day of execution. Your life will be spared. So it's a day of pardon. Jesus came. In fact, if you go and look in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus goes into the local synagogue. He's been asked to read from the scroll. He says, the spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim good news to the poor, to the blind, and all this. It's a quotation from a passage in the Old Testament that actually has the phrase, and to proclaim the day of the Lord's vengeance in it. Jesus, when he's reading that passage from Isaiah in Luke chapter 4, does not quote it's a day for vengeance whatsoever. And so Jesus echoes this thing of David, where David goes, it's not a day for execution, it's a day for pardon. Jesus also doesn't want to execute you. Peter tells us in his writings, he says that God is patient because he doesn't want anyone to perish. And so he's giving you time to respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ, that there is good news for the rebel. And just like David came back to Jerusalem and sat on his throne, Jesus is one day coming back and going to sit on his throne and reign and rule over the new heavens and the new earth. And all of us rebels who have turned and found peace with that God will get to enjoy that forever. And that is why there is hope for the rebel.
Well, you might have thought that you lost connection. You didn't. I was just stunned. What a magnificent list of parallels. What a great God to express that to us and to remind us time and time again. Friend who is listening, please be studying and reading your Bible. It will help you grow on this faith journey with Jesus.
Yes. You can do exactly what I just did.
Yes.
If you will give it enough time and not just try to read a verse a day, but make a commitment to study the Bible, you can do what I just did there, and you can blow your own mind.
Yes. Yeah, and maybe that of friends and family who are also searching because they know that their rebellious heart isn't enough, or whatever thing is making them feel less than. They can know that there's a God who offers hope. Amen. And we can find him, and he's easily and readily accessible. So we're going to continue into week 14 this coming weekend. We hope that you will join us as we continue to expand on the story of David and the rise and fall of his kingship. And we want you to subscribe, share with a friend, and we can't wait to see you continue to grow on your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.